What was I going to do tonight? Well, you know what I thought I'd do tonight? Oh, Richard, could you pass me over the paper if I printed it? If not, I don't need it.
I don't know which paper where.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I don't need it. I am going to do a knit demonstration, but part of the reason why I'm doing it is it's got several techniques in it. It's got elastic on the waistband, it's got bands, and it's got a 1/4 inch seam allowance, my very favorite. And it's actually a pattern. That's always a difficult word for me. It's by Brindille and Twig, and they do lots of downloadable patterns. And I have actually used quite a few other patterns lately for baby wear. And this is a free pattern on their website, which is brindleandtwig.com, I think. And it is for a pair of bummies. Okay, I think it's not a word I've ever met before, but it's basically a pair of shorts for a baby. And I think it's fun, and I think there's some great techniques. So I thought, why don't I do a whole thing tonight? So what I'm going to do is I'm literally going to sew them, and then I'm going to come back and look for questions. So I am set up. I'm actually using the Triumph tonight. I didn't introduce myself. I fail to do that every week. My name's Deb Canham. I'm a serger specialist. What I'm going to do tonight, you can do on any serger, any serger. I'm going to be using 4-thread overlock. Why 4-thread overlock? Because it is the stretchiest stitch, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to tell you what my settings are in case you need to know them. I'm working on the Triumph, and I'm just going to move you over to the other camera. And I have my stitch width on 7.5, my stitch length on 2.5, and I have my automatic stitch selector, because I'm using a baby lock, is on A alpha because I'm using a wide stitch. But I am using my differential feed, okay? That is really important to this project because I'm working with a knit. Now, what I want to do is remind you that, or I want to point something out. I am using a plastic foot. I very rarely use the plastic foot, and I'm doing construction, and I would much rather be using a metal foot. But I don't want to have to tell you that I lost my metal foot. I don't know if it'll turn up. I've ordered another one. Okay, so tonight I'm using the metal foot, and let me just repeat, I am using my differential feed because I'm working on knits, and what that's going to do is it's going to compensate for the stretch. And it's why I love the Serger and knits. And what's even better about it all, these patterns have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I can lift my foot and put my fabric right up to the needles. And I should have said that I'm going to sew the 2 side seams and the crotch seam. Let me just show you the pattern pieces. This is half of it. Let me turn you slightly. This is half of it. That is the front. It was cut on a fold. And this is the other half of it, and the front's a very slightly different shape, but I'm sewing the side seams. So my needles are going to go straight into the fabric, and off we go. And you can see I've got pins in here, but I've pinned them horizontal to the edge so that I don't damage my knife. And here I am coming up to the end, and I am going to make those ends match, okay? Be proactive, make your ends match. People always say, oh, but it doesn't match at the end. So that's one side. Now I'm going to sew the other side. I'm going to lift my foot, place it right up to the needles, and I am going to stitch. I'm going to take my pin out. And I am keeping that raw edge right up to my knife. And that's actually one of my favorite ways of using the serger, because it's very accurate. My stitch is about 1/4 inch, but my knife is acting as a guide, making sure my ends match. And then I have one more seam, crotch seam. Lift my foot, put it right up to the needles and against the knife. And I could have used stretch thread, I could have used stretch thread throughout. I could have used stretch thread in my upper and lower looper. The advantage of using stretch thread is that it is softer. I don't know that there's any big advantage to it stretch wise, really, but it is softer. So I have sewn my side seams and my crotch seam, and at this point, if I wasn't talking to you, I would go and press this, because pressing is everything. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to pin in my bands, and I am going to, oh, let me tell you about the bands. I cut out 2 bands and I cut them to the size, and then I cut them to the size, I think it was 2 inches by 8.5, something like that, and then I folded them together and I pressed them. And when you work with this kind of fabric, it always wants to curl to the right side. I am using cotton with spandex. It's the knits that I sell on my website. They're all art gallery. I particularly like them for baby wear because they're so soft. So anyway, it is a nightmare. It's all about the pressing. You're going to go to the iron and you're going to press lots of steam and let it dry on the ironing board. Don't pick it up wet, and don't stretch it. Don't get the urge to see how stretchy it is. Whenever I'm in class, people are always sort of looking at me going like this, and I think, don't do that, because it makes it curl again. Okay, so what I did was I pressed it nicely, and what I did next was I opened it out and I sewed the 2 ends together, okay, the short ends, and that gave me a continuous band. And at that point I pressed it again so it was nice and flat, and I have a continuous band. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to pin this into the leg holes, and I'm going to match my edge of my seam up with the edge of the pant leg. I know you can't see me doing that, but that's what I'm doing. So that took me a couple of minutes. And I've got the seam on my leg going the opposite direction to the seam in my cuff. And you invariably have to stretch these things slightly, but not too much, I hope. Right, I'm just pinning it in. Are there any questions, Richard? Because I could answer them while I'm doing this. Am I using a ballpoint needle? I certainly am using a ballpoint needle. You can use any ballpoint needle in the Serger side. I am actually using ELX 705, which again I can use, and that is the dedicated needle for my machine in a ballpoint form. But you need to check with your manual what your recommended needles are. But you can use just any regular ballpoint needle, and you can use ballpoint or stretch. They're pretty much interchangeable. So whatever works for you.
Could you post the name of the designer company and the name of the pattern, please?
It's actually in the title for the class. I don't think I can get Richard to do it. I think that's pushing it. It's Brindille and Twig. If somebody knows it, would they kindly write it up? So I have my little band inside my leg, okay? And you'll notice that I am going to be sewing with the body of the garment, the main body here, down against the feed dogs, because that is my vulnerable fabric, okay? So I want that against the feed dogs. The band probably won't stretch too much in the sewing because it's a double band. So my vulnerable fabric against the feed dogs. And you'll also notice that it's a very small leg. So let me take you back here and I'll show you. I'm going to do something that I always tell you never to do. I love doing that. Right,
What's the differential feed? What number of the differential
differential feed is on 1.3. Now I'm going to take off the plastic foot, and I always say to you, do not use the curved foot sewing knits, okay? I'm using the curved foot. And why am I using the curved foot? Well, it's not going to be in touch with my feed dog, so it's not really so great for knits. But when I weigh up my options, I've got a very small leg here, and I've got to go around it. And what I want to do is I want to use this foot because it is shorter, okay? It's shorter than all my other feet, so I can get it inside my circle. Okay, so putting the vulnerable fabric right under. I'm going to pull on my thread chain to release my stitches off the stitch finger, and that will allow me to slide this in and get it right up to the edge. Reminding you, it's only 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on this, so I love that. I just love it. It's going to, you know, it's more accurate. You get far less problems with small seam allowances than you do with big ones. So what I'm going to do is I am going to sew around this edge, and I'm not trimming anything off, and I've got to make sure that I catch all 3 fabrics. And I haven't come to my seam yet. I was ahead of my seam because it's easier not to start on the seam. And I'm now going to get to the seam. Right. So I'm using the shorter foot, curved foot, because it fits inside that smaller circle, you know, the leg. Right, I'm coming up to my join, which I would have pressed, but I didn't. But it's not going to give me any trouble. Keeping those edges up there. And I've got the right side of the band against the right side of my fabric. I'm coming around here and I want to chop that off. And here's my seam. Now I'm coming up to the seam, and I want to make sure that I match my edges up well and it goes over it. I'm not stretching my fabric. I'm letting it feed with the feed dogs. Now it's coming up to that band, and actually I'm not having any trouble, but some of you sometimes say that you do. But because I've got the band on top, that's helping me. But when I come up here, if I think my stitches are getting short, I'm going to lift my foot and release the pressure. What I don't want to do is cut my initial stitches, and I'm not. So stitching off. And that has put my band in. Let me come back to the main picture. So I've got one leg band in. It might only have one leg band tonight, but that's good enough. And could you see how nice that leg band is? So I've still got the other one to put in. I don't know if I'll get that done on camera, but if I don't, I'll do it later. But what I want to go to next is the elastic. Now the great thing about these patterns is it actually tells you what size to cut the elastic, because there's something we never know, isn't it? What circumference we should do for a baby. Now on the Serger, you always want to use knit elastic, okay? That's the soft elastic, not that hard ridge stuff. That will, the needles bounce off that and they don't stitch it well. And in any case, it's not comfortable with soft knits, not applicable. So you're going to take your waistband. I forget what size it was, 14 inches possibly. And what I've done is I've marked it into 4 areas. Can you see that? There's a black mark at the bottom there. There's a black mark there. There's 4 black marks. And what they indicate is the center front, center back. Center back's going to be where the join is, and the 2 sides. So what I need to find on this upper pant section is the center front, center back, and I already can see where the side seams are. So I have those marked. I just put a little black mark on them when I cut them out. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I am going to pin I'll be with you in a second. I have to pin it on my knee before I turn it over. You're going to pin it inside the actual pant leg. And I need to work out first which is the front and which is the back. And I'm holding it by the crutch. And do you see one side is longer? The longer side is the back because we have to go over a bottom. So I'm going to put 4 pins in and then I'm going to show you what I've done. Any questions, Richard?
Well, yes, unfortunately, I can't reply to anything.
No?
Would it not be easy to not serge the middle part until the 2 leg bindings are attached and then serge the middle?
You could certainly do that. Somebody said, would it not be easier to sew the bindings on to the open leg and then sew the sides up? Absolutely, that's another option. Great idea. And this size I can get inside the leg, but you're always going to find those projects like cuffs. Cuffs are always small. Something like a cuff, then absolutely you want to do exactly that. You want to leave your side seam open and put your cuff on. Got one more pin to put in. Oops.
Someone said on a small project I put the bands on before the side seam is
Yes,
sewn.
I've just answered that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Seems
sorry.
a bit different. Well, there you go.
Certainly, when you're doing baby clothing, leggings, cuffs, things like that, I would recommend sewing the bands on before you sew the side seams up. But this is actually big enough to cope with it. So I decided to show you that just so I could show you that I was using the circular foot. Okay, so I'm going to take you back to the machine and I'm going to do the next bit. Right, so I have my elastic pinned into, actually, let me turn you sideways slightly so you can have a look. I've got my elastic put into my thing and I'm about top of my pant and I'm going to have to stretch it. And I've pinned it in the 4 places that I've marked. And there's about 1/4 of an inch of fabric above the elastic. Okay, so I am going to put it under the foot. Somebody says, was the main fabric inside out when sewing? Right sides together, right sides together. Right side of band to the right side of the inside when I sewed it on. Right, I am going to start somewhere. I'm going to start on a side seam. So what I want to do is, let me just pull you out of it. What I want to do is pull my stitch finger off so I can get my fabric right up there. And I need to cut this time. But you know, when you go on sometimes, you just have to drive on and steer to where you need to go. You sometimes can't get exactly where you want to go. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to drive on. And this time round, I do want to be cutting off this 1/4 of an inch. But at this point, I just want to get to there. Okay, so I am going to do that. I'm going to take my pin out. Right, so what I am cutting a little bit of fabric, a little bit of fabric off as I go, 1/4 of an inch. I have now got to where I wanted to start. I'm going to put my needles all the way down into the elastic and the fabric. And the reason for that is I am going to stretch my fabric out to my next pin. And I'm going to stretch my fabric so that it's the same amount of fabric as the fabric I have underneath. Okay, so my elastic's flat against the fabric. And I'm pulling on this elastic and I'm just going to stitch. And actually I'm still using my curved foot, and normally I would change to the other one. I forgot. So what I'm doing is I'm stretching to that pin. And sometimes it helps to go behind if it starts to bulk up. Put your hand behind and stretch it. Just going to get to this pin. Right, needles well down. I'm going to stretch it to the next point. I'm going to grab my pin and I'm going to hold my elastic at the back. I only want 1/4 of an inch off my fabric, so I'm going to position that elastic. I'm not cutting the elastic. I'm using the elastic as a guide, and I'm running my knife right beside it. Now, if I did cut it, only you and I would know. It wouldn't matter too much if you did nick your elastic. So coming up to this pin, okay, stopping before I hit it. Needles well down into the machine. If I did it with the needles not fully down, do you see it could break a needle? So that's the reason for that. I've stretched it right out. I'm going to hold it at the back. Now I've got to tell you, this pattern comes with different styles. You could just put a tie in there. Right, coming up to this pin, I've only got one more section to go. Okay, I'm not going to hit the pin. I like going real close though, because it makes it more exciting. Right. That's the last section. I'm going to cut off that first bit where I didn't get to the elastic and steer off. Right, I'm going to come back round to the front. How are we doing for time? It's 22. Whoops, didn't go. Right, so basically, if I had got the other cuff on, which I haven't, do you see how my elastic is attached at the top? And what you're going to do at that point is you are going to fold it over. And my recommendation is this. When I've folded it over, I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and I am going to use a zigzag stitch, and I'm going to stitch down into the stitching I've already used to make the waistband hold down. And I really like that method because it stops it from folding over. And when I use my sewing machine, I'm going to have to do the same thing. I'm going to have to stretch my elastic out so that my fabric's flat, okay? And sew it that way. I'm not going to show you that because that's a sewing machine thing. I'm just demoing the Serger tonight. But aren't they cute? Right, let me look at questions. Yes, I am a thrill seeker. I'm a thrill seeker at the best of times. So, if we sign up for the bodysuit, can we buy the fabric? He laughed at that.
Seeker. You do all you can to avoid thrills.
He says, I do all I can to avoid thrills. Yeah, there's quite a few things I don't like. I'd rather be sewing. What is your machine setting for sewing the last time? Okay, stitch length, stitch width 7.5, stitch length 2.5 to 3. I have my knife up and cutting because I'm using it as a guide. I'd love to have my knife as a guide. My differential feed is on 1.3, and I have automatic tensions on this baby lock, and they are on A alpha because it's a wide stitch. Is there a file for tonight? Yes, I will put the file in the usual place, which for those of you that don't know it, is in the file section of my group, Deb Canham Serger Sanity Projects. Okay, because there's no file section in this public page. So I'll put it up there. It will give you the name of it, and it'll tell you my settings. It'll tell you how I did it. Would a cover stitch be too much thread when turning down elastic? Would a chain stitch work? Okay, that's a great question, and I'm glad you mentioned it. So I said to you, when you've turned over your elastic, take it to your sewing machine and sew it, yeah? I will post up a picture of these finished. Go to your sewing machine, use a zigzag stitch. I am not so keen on using cover stitch. I think it's easier to use a zigzag stitch. And for this project, I love cover stitch otherwise, and absolutely not a chain stitch really. Chain stitch doesn't have any stretch in it. Zigzag does have a bit, so I think it's safer using the zigzag stitch. Is the pattern included in the project? This is a free pattern from Brindille Twig. If you've never done any baby stuff, it's a great one to start with. It's fun to sew. You've got bands, you've got putting in elastic. They also have a version where you make the casing and you actually put in a little tie, which I thought was quite cute too. This is not the bodysuit project. The bodysuit project is the kind of onesies that I've been doing, and I don't have any because we had the baby shower on Saturday, and this will surprise you all. I gave my samples to my daughter-in-law. No, normally they never get the samples. Yeah, the bodysuit class is on Teachable, on my Teachable online Serger school. If you put Deb Canham /Teachable on a Google search, it will bring it up, and you look for bodysuit. Why not use the lace foot as a guide? Then you can't cut the elastic. Oh, but it's so much more exciting not cutting the elastic. You certainly, in actual fact, you know, you could use the elastic foot. You could use the elastic foot to put the elastic in. I just think that when you stretch elastic, it goes so straight that there's not much to guide. You know, you just have to avoid the knife slightly. But I use my knife. You know, everybody thinks a serger, everything you sew with a serger, you're going to cut the fabric. I very rarely cut fabric. Very rarely cut fabric with my serger. If I can sew just using the knife as a guide, that's a lot of how I sew. And there's two reasons for that. One, I've got the accuracy. You know, it's difficult on the serger when you're cutting fabric always to get it the right width. You know, whereas when I'm sewing against the knife, I know it's 1/4 of an inch on a wide stitch or nearabouts. And then the other reason I don't use my knife quite often is if I'm sewing something tremendously thick. You know, I sew 4 layers of bosal foam, and you know it's hard to even get under the foot. But I never use my knife to cut it. That's setting yourself up for failure. But what I do is I use it as a guide, and I can sew anything. Thank you, Kay. Kay said she's so proud of me for giving her my samples. Well, you know, I'm not going out on the road, so other than showing you, I've got no samples to show anybody. I've got a house full of samples and nowhere to go with them. So, yeah, you should finally give some samples away. Yeah, well, you know, the great news about that, you know, some of the things I made for Claire that I never got to give her, Claire's my 3-year-old granddaughter, I can give to the new one when they get to that size. So I'm ahead of the game now. So yeah, so I just want to tell you that I've had a crazy busy day, and I also had a lot of people requesting my scrappy bag pattern today, and of course it expired this morning. So my discount code for this week is Facebook 70 FB 70, which is last week's code, because I extended this another week. Okay, this was made on the Serger. And it's the scrappy purse, and it's normally 15, and you can get it for 12 on my website if you use the coupon code FB70. Oh, don't worry, I'll make Claire more things. I'm now going to have to make two of everything. And Claire needs the bigger size, she's so tall. So yes, I think that is it, unless I've missed any urgent questions. Lovely, Nana. Mine's due in May too. If I haven't answered your questions, I will certainly do so. I will read through and answer them.
Into the inside of the bag.
Inside of the bag. Yeah. The inside of the bag has the handles in and a lining. Can't see, can you? You see? And these handles are tubing, and they're kind of circular, and I secured them inside. Okay, so I will see you all next week. Please post up if you have anything you want to share on the group, Deb Canham Serger Sanity Projects. Or how do you calculate ribbing? Okay. You know, I almost don't want to get on that subject. Me, most of the time, I leave one shoulder open and attach my ribbing or my neckband, okay? And that's because I don't truly think it's that easy to say just 1%, because it really depends on how stretchy your fabric is. Somebody wants to know what percent for cutting a neckband to fit a t-shirt. So, you know, my real feeling is that it's easier to have one shoulder open and stretch it as you sew it together, and you're done. But there are some patterns. I think this is one. This is the Seattle Tee, where I maybe did put this in with their recommended neckband, and it worked really well. But if I went on to do this in another fabric, say a double brush polyester spandex or something, which I probably wouldn't because that's not my favorite t-shirt fabric, great for leggings, it would be too stretchy. It would be too stretchy. I'd probably want smaller. So, you know, I don't want to give you the percentages because I don't really work with them. Sherry's asking me, I'm new to the Serger, what stitch am I using? I was using 4-thread overlock. It is the stretchiest stitch.
Don't forget to refer her to your 101 if you.
Yeah, if you're new, have a look at my 101 classes. It's Serger Sanity 1 and 2. So. Okay, there's a couple of questions. I'm going to come back to you on message. Lorna said, would it not be easier to not serge the middle part until the 2 leg bindings are attached? And then you certainly could do it that way. I did cover that, I think. I don't know when your question came in. I'm just looking through. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you now. I look forward to seeing you next Monday. I will be here 7 o'clock Eastern. If there's a subject you really want me to cover, I will certainly do that. I will put that other band on first thing tomorrow. And I will post a picture up, and I will do my zigzag on my sewing machine so you can see the finished pants. But I think they're real cute, quick and easy, and they only take a little bit of fabric, so good practice. Okay, see you next week. Thank you so much for coming in and joining me tonight. I so appreciate you being here. Good night.